All right, we're back with a special edition. Unfortunately, on some sad news in the rock and roll world, but to shed some light on the passing of ex-WASP and KEEL and LA Guns drummer Stephen Riley, we have from formerly of WASP and Steeler, which turned into KEEL. Please welcome bassist Rick Fox. Rick,
how you doing today?
greetings.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Sorry
to join on this somber occasion. I've done multiple interviews with Stephen in the last couple years. He will be featured in a number of our specials coming up. He lived right up the street from us here. But Stephen Riley, of course, moved to LA in the early 70s and was actually in a revival of Steppenwolf at the time.
True.
Yeah.
That's true.
And he'd even played in that band, the Bees, the BZZZ Z band out of Chicago. I believe Tom Werman produced that. And of course, when he joined KEEL for the Right to Rock album with Ron Keel after Steeler disbanded, he had, of course, Gene Simmons produced there. And then later in LA Guns, he had Andy Johns produce. So he had worked with some of the greatest producers in rock history. And Steve was, a journeyman. He was a hell of a drummer. But what I found interesting was, of course, we know of your story and other segments. You can check out Rick's story about joining what became WASP in the early days, and as we would vouch for, crediting coming up with the name WASP. Tony Richards was the drummer, and he was replaced by Stephen Riley after he left KEEL, which was right after Steeler. So again, you guys kind of crossed in a way, not in the same timeline, but he a little later went from the Steeler KEEL camp with Ron Keel to, of course, WASP for the, Tony Richards, I believe, only played on the first album.
Yeah.
Stephen Riley played on, what was it? The Electric Circus?
Circus, yeah.
What was the second album?
Last Command.
The Last Command in 85. Yeah. Inside the Electric Circus 86, and Live in the Raw, the album 87. And he joined LA Guns in 88. The KEEL album was done in 85, so he literally went from KEEL right into recording The Last Command. But he originally came from the East Coast, like yourself.
Yeah, he was from Boston.
Yeah.
Massachusetts, from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Steve first came onto my radar, and I didn't know who he was yet at the time, because all of us who are Angel fans were following what happened when Mickey Jones was fired from Angel. And I was talking to my people in New York who were trying to get me a gig with Angel at that time.
Yeah. I
was getting news clippings of what his progress was as he was moving on from Angel. And in the Midwest, in the Chicago, I think, area, Illinois, Steve was playing in a band with Mickey Jones, Mickey Free, Pete Comita, who wound up eventually in Cheap Trick.
Yep.
And the name is on the tip of my tongue, and I can't pull it up. But I have the ad in my Angel clippings collection. And it says Steve Riley. But I first met Steve when he was with KEEL. It might have been when we did a show together in San Bernardino at the Orange Pavilion. And my band Sin, I was already out of Steeler. I was in Sin, and we did a show, but we were the main support for KEEL. And it was during sound check, and I was hanging out, and I just went over and started talking to him. It didn't click that it was the same Steve Riley. And when I told him that I had the clippings, and so we just kind of hit it off right off the bat. We became instant buddies. And the Bees, as you mentioned, came out of the Illinois band, the Boys, Boyzzz.
Right.
And I'm still friends with Mike Tafoya, who's a guitar player in the Boys. I saw them in Manhattan at Great Gildersleeve's Club in the 70s when their album Too Wild to Tame came out. But the Boys split, and you had Dirt's Raiders was Dirty Dan Buck was the singer of the Boys. So he had Dirt's Raiders, and then you had the Bees. So they just kind of split like that when the band broke up. And Riley wound up in the Bees. So cut to when I'm in Steeler, and we got the support slot for Quiet Riot in May of '83. Originally, that slot to open for Quiet Riot was the Bees. I still have the ad in my Steeler collection, and it's it said Quiet Riot, has your pictures, Perkins Palace, and underneath that small letter says the Bees, like that. And I don't remember if I asked Steve about that they were originally supposed to open. Something beyond above our pay grade happened, and we got put in. Steeler got put into that slot, so the Bees got knocked out of that. But then, like I said, I met Stephen face to face. Well, I guess when we were opening for KEEL or supporting KEEL, and so we hit it off right away. We became really good friends. Now, some years after that, he came by my apartment in Hollywood. I mean, his girlfriend or his wife at the time, and we, I don't remember why he came over, but we were walking in the street. We were talking about W.A.S.P, and he says to me, he goes, when we were looking for a bass player, I brought your name up because I knew you were a really cool guy. I knew you were a bass player. You were like popular around town. So we had a meeting, and he goes, and I suggested, how about Rick Fox? He goes, Blackie went ballistic. And Steve had not known that I was already in W.A.S.P and out of W.A.S.P.
Right.
So he had no idea why Blackie would go so ballistic over my name. It's like, no, I don't want that fucking guy in my band. No. Steve was like, all right. Sorry, I brought it up. And when I told Steve the story that I was already originally the guy who came up with the name W.A.S.P, I was in the band already before hit all of that. He's like, oh, now it makes sense. And he starts telling me all these stories about Blackie and what it was like being in W.A.S.P and how they would have band meeting. And this is all before Johnny Rod, of course.
Yeah.
They would have band meetings, before the tour. And they would discuss who's going to wear what. They come up with costume ideas. Steve said, Blackie would look at all our costume ideas and go, no. And he'd shoot down everybody's costume ideas. Go back to the drawing board, come up with something else. Because the next meeting, we'd be sitting there, and Blackie's costume ideas were a combination of everybody else's ideas that he shot down. So he goes, Blackie's like he steals everybody's ideas like that, and so he was kind of confirming some things about, Blackie that had been going around and like that behind the scenes. So, but he says, yeah, he goes, I knew your name and you're kind of a nice guy. And I thought you'd be perfect for that. And Steve at this point was already in, I think, LA Guns.
Yeah.
And I'm friends with the LA Guns guys. So that's kind of like my story with Steve. When LA Guns came to, or on tour, 1988 was the Show No Mercy tour. And their tour manager was Corky Gunn. Mike, forget what his last name. Mike Caracciolo or something. He's on YouTube now. He's got his storytelling page on YouTube. I think it's called Before I Forget or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Road Dog.
Corky. I knew Corky. Corky was in a band in New York called Sweet Pain.
Right.
With Bruno Ravel and those guys, all my other friends from Brooklyn. So Corky goes here and he hands me, like tour laminates. So I could just hang with them wherever, I wanted. So I hung up and did country club. I got pictures of Steve Riley, playing drums, looking at me over on stage left, making faces and stuff. Kelly Nichols making faces and all that. I was looking right before you contacted me when you told me about Steve passing. I was going to start looking at my photo collection. I have a picture of him backstage at the Roxy, I think it is, when LA Guns played there. And Steve is like doing like this, like he's got his hand on his chin, like he's thinking something thoughtful or whatever. I was going to post that in my condolences when I get around to posting it in Facebook. That's my personal picture of Steve.
Yeah.
He was always real nice to me. I know that there has been talk about chemistry problems with him, with LA Guns, scuttle about this and that, and he was trying to take over and be like the business guy and cause some friction in the band and whatnot, and led to an unfortunate parting of the ways with LA Guns.
Well, he ran the business for a lot of years there, and then Tracy Guns wanted to come back, and there was tension between him and Tracy.
Right. So yeah, they didn't see eye to eye about how it was going to be run. But despite all of that, I never had a negative interaction with Steve. He was, like I said, he was always nice to me. He was very cool. So I can't ding him on that because that's my personal experience with him. So it's just sad and unfortunate that the first thing I heard about this morning was through you, and so God, another rock icon, goes down.
Yeah. Well, it hurts the most because it's from our generation. It's one thing for these guys in their 70s and 80s or 90s, that we hear from the 60s or early 70s, but this is a guy known in the 80s and 90s, and 67 is not old. I mean, he's obviously on the young side.
He's the same age as me.
Yeah, I mean,
we're the same age.
News will come out eventually what medical condition he had. Like I say, with the talk was he'd been using a cane to walk for the last month or so, and of course he had been hospitalized recently, so it had gone to a downturn and lost his battle. But when he joined KEEL for Right to Rock, I know Ron and Mark Ferrari, they were excited because he was definitely a step up from what they had used before. And Steve was a world-class drummer. He hit so hard. And again, the proof is in the pudding with the Right to Rock and, all those songs, Back to the City and, Easier Said Than Done, So Many Girls, So Little Time, Electric Love, Speed Demon, all
when
that.
When you say he was a world-class drummer, that's no understatement because, like I said, he'd been around playing the Midwest circuit, and like you said, he was with Steppenwolf. That was another thing that we hit off really well on because I've been a fan of Steppenwolf since 1968.
Yeah,
I was like 13 years old. So he told me some Steppenwolf stories and things like that, anecdotes and whatnot. And that was another reason why we hit it off. And then when he said the Bees and I said the Boys, he goes, yeah, the same band. And so he thought it was cool that I was kind of following indirectly his journey without really actually knowing him. And so it was great to finally meet him. And so when you say world class, he brought all of that worldly and experience to the table. And when you have and I've run into this, I've experienced this myself. So I know when you're a guy that's got a lot of experience in things that the guys around you don't have yet or have very little of, you can come off as and be perceived as being too pushy or controlling or like that. I experienced it in a couple of my bands. And if you're the guy that knows the ropes more or less of what you're doing in the band, and some of the other guys are not involved in those aspects of it, they sometimes see that as it's a perceived territorial threat, and they think you're a difficult guy, you're too egotistical, you're pushy, you're hard to get along with. You have to know both sides of the story, and then somewhere in the middle is story A, story B. Somewhere in the middle is the truth. So I know that Steve, you get a lot of drummers who are just drummers. They're not guys who know the business.
Right.
Steve was
Typically thought of as the least intelligent of the crew.
the guy in the back hitting things with sticks. So
yeah, it's like the character in the Sesame Street. What was his name? Monster?
Oh, Animal.
Animal.
Yeah.
He just beat on trash cans.
Yeah. But, Steve is one of those guys that worked his way up through the business and watched how everything was done, took his notes, and then put that up here, and so with each subsequent band he was in, he brought that experience to the table. And if he did not have those kind of interpersonal chemistry problems with the other bands he was with, then surely by the time he got to LA, I don't think it was so much, in his own defense, I don't think it was so much, it might have been him being the problem. Because, when you get to LA, the mentality is, everybody wants to be the star. Everybody wants to shine. Everybody's competing for that spotlight moment, however long or short it is. And here comes in a guy who knows what he's doing, walks the walk, not just talk the talk, walks the walk, and delivers on what he says he's going to do. Some people see that as a perceived territorial threat to their own egos or whatever, and they don't see that as somebody bringing value to the table. I can't speak to how Steve brought it to the table, and maybe that's wherein the crux of some of the problems lie.
Well, he had a couple major label deals before KEEL. Roadmaster, his band 76, had a deal, and
That's
then, like I say,
yeah,
the Bees had a deal. Their album "Get Up" in '82 was produced by Tom Werman, so they were on Epic Records.
Yeah. And I had both Roadmaster albums. I found them in like a record bin in Manhattan before I left New York.
Right.
They were kind of in the same vein as REO Speedwagon.
Right.
But for some reason, I was not an REO fan, but I liked Roadmaster. And they had, similar stuff.
Yeah, the
and I remember
Rick Raff era.
Yeah, I remember Steve Riley being in Roadmaster as well. So all of these bands he was in, I was kind of like a sort of a fan of. Steppenwolf and the Bees, the Boys, and Roadmaster and stuff like that. So that's why we hit it off really well when I finally got to meet him. We did the show together like that with KEEL and Sin. So it was only natural. I mean, we hit it off. So it was like, no. So it was like two guys that have gone through the same thing in two different places. Like two brothers from another mother, something like that.
Yeah. Well, Steve also told us an interesting story in our Van Halen salute, and you guys want to definitely check that out, where he said he was friends with Mickey from Angel.
Yeah.
And they'd be partying at the Starwood and the whiskey. And Edward Van Halen showed up one night in his van, and they all decided they're going up to Barry Levine's house where Steve was living with Barry up in Laurel Canyon. And they get up there, and Ed had a cassette of the new Van Halen album that no one had heard. So this had to have been late 1977.
Yeah.
And he said Ed put the cassette on, and his fucking jaw was on the floor. He was like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
And they heard their version of "You Really Got Me," and there were rumors that Mickey thought, "Well, shit, before they put this album out, why don't we go cut our Angel version of You Really Got Me and rush it out? Let's see if we can beat these guys to the punch." But he said Ed was just so humble driving that crazy van. They'd haul their gear in, and he was one of the first guys outside the record company or the band to hear the Van Halen debut album.
Yeah. For the life of me, I'm trying to remember that name now. That Midwest band, they all played in together. You know what? Pete Comita was a singer.
Okay,
he wasn't.
So this is after Mickey got kicked out of Angel.
Yeah. Then they had a band. The ad that they're playing in was a club in the Midwest that everybody knew called the Thirsty Whale.
Right.
Famous and the pictures club. along the bottom. It said Mickey Jones, Mickey Free, Steve Riley, I think Pete Comito might have been going by a different, Pete Valentine, I think he was going by. And he was a singer. That's why, Mickey Jones was playing bass. This was a band that Mickey put together. He had formed with these guys from the Midwest. So, and there was one other guy in the band. I can't remember who his name was. And for the life of me, like I said, it's on the tip of my tongue. And I can't remember it. If I would have prepared better for this interview, I would have looked it up real quick to find it, but because it's up in my angel collection in the box.
Well, they obviously never got signed or never put out a record, so it's definitely a footnote.
Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, it's very sad to see Steve's past.
Yeah, Steve was rock solid. I mean, he was with LA Guns from late 80s all the way up through 2010, and Forever Hollywood 2012.
Yeah.
And then that's when Tracy Guns came back and did a one-off reunion with Phil Lewis, the singer.
Yeah.
And he decided, well, let's just keep our group as LA Guns. Fuck Steve, Yeah. And that's when there were two LA Guns. Steve had his band, and eventually Tracy, being the original, Guns and Roses and Guns and LA Guns, kind of proved like, well, hold up, I'm the founder. I predate any of these guys.
Yeah.
Even Phil and definitely Steve. So, that's when they forced Steve's band to be called Riley's LA Guns.
Yeah.
And obviously the future of that band is completely up in arms. They have the completed album Dark Horse, which is going to be released any day now. And who knows if they'll recruit another drummer. It's kind of odd with the name Riley's LA Guns not to have Riley in it.
It's ironic too that over time these bands split, and then somebody puts their name in front of it as like it's their possession. We led the way with that back in 83 when I had my band Sin, and I left the band under really, it was a bad situation, and I left the band, and then they were the guys that when I suggested the name Sin as a spinoff here, they were all against it. They went, no. I said, I'll give you 2 weeks. If you can't come up with a better name, it's going to be Sin. And 2 weeks later, they didn't have it, so we called it Sin. And they were, like I said, they were just against it. And all of a sudden, within several months, we're headlining everywhere. And they were like, hey, yeah, we're in Sin, so they're digging the name. And then when I left the band when we were recording the first album, then it became a fight over the name. Now they were fighting to keep it. And I started getting booked around Hollywood as Rick Fox's Sin, because the clubs didn't know which Sin was Sin. And I showed them my paperwork holding the copyright, the service mark for the name. So now, like, you cannot book them as Sin. I own the name. So, like, we led the way. Now you have Jack Russell's Great White, Steve Riley's LA Guns. It's nothing new. We were one of the first bands to do that. And I didn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't because I didn't want to. I didn't want to have to put my name in front of it. I said, that's ridiculous. That's like Motley Crue breaking up and then calling it Nikki Sixx's Motley Crue. That sounds so ridiculous.
Well, there were troubles. If you know the history of Steppenwolf, when they originally broke up, there were other versions of Steppenwolf. And I'm pretty sure the version that Steven was playing was probably Nick St. Nicholas or one of those Goldie or one of those other guys. Yeah. And then John Kay formed John Kay and Steppenwolf and came back to let everybody know. Right. All these dudes were just band members. I'm the fucking founder of Steppenwolf. So if you want to book Steppenwolf, it's John Kay and Steppenwolf.
And that works better if you're the singer, because you're the front guy. You're the tip of the spear, as we say in the military.
Yeah.
It's different for a bass player or a drummer to have to put their name in front of the name of the band, because we're like, bass player is kind of like a side guy, unless you're WASP, in that case. But if you're a drummer and you're in the back and you say Steve Riley's LA Guns, well, then everybody's got to go past the singer, because the drummer is like the name up there.
Right.
It gets really weird, like, to have to do that,
Yeah, well, there's power in the name, and at least Steve could use L.A. Guns. He just had to put Riley's in front of it. He didn't have to put the whole Stephen Riley's L.A. Guns, just Riley's L.A. Guns. So it kind of
And you got Rat. You have Rat, and you have Bobby Blotz's Rat. I mean, that's pretty silly to have to do that.
Well, he got sued and stopped that. It's called the Rat Attack now. What he's trying to do,
right? So you're making different variation.
Crochet, he's trying to go out as the other voice of Rat, being the main backing vocalist. So that's
but I mean, Stephen Piercy is the front guy. It was originally Mickey Rat.
He's the voice of Rat. So again, you're gonna angle towards that. It's a lot easier to find a new guitarist, bassist, and drummer than it is to find another singer that has that pedigree.
Yeah. And look, for all intents and purposes, people I bump into online go, yeah, I still remember Rick Fox's Sin. I say, you don't remember it as Sin? No, I remember Rick Fox's Sin. So go figure,
Yeah. Well, like I also said, I emailed you this morning. There's a big new article in Classic Rock Magazine, which is easily, if not the greatest magazine in the world. It's UK based. And they have a big article about the 80s hard rock scene being the epicenter of glam metal, hair metal, whatever you want to call it. But that whole scene that spawned so many great bands, LA was the epicenter. And of course, the Sunset Strip and the Country Club in Reseda and Troubadour down on Santa Monica and Doheny. These were of course, Perkins Palace in Pasadena. These were the epicenters for the scene. And Stephen Riley obviously played there with KEEL. He played there with W.A.S.P. He probably played there with, some other band, and of course, Frankie Banali came in after, Stephen in W.A.S.P. and we lost Frankie a couple years ago. Of course, the last remaining member of Quiet Riot,
Rudy.
Yeah, Rudy's back in now, and I just interviewed Carlos Cavazo recently. Obviously, he's playing with Carmine Apiece and the Paul Shortino.
Did you ask him about Freak Show?
I did. He talked a little bit about that. And he says
he's playing with us in Freak Show.
Yeah, he's real comfortable at home. Doing tracks. He's a little more resistant, to the road. You get comfortable with the wife and the dogs and he's got a Ferrari in the garage. Carlos is kind of like Bigfoot, man. People had rarely heard from him, so I did a very extensive interview with him for Rock Forever.
We just shot 2 videos a couple of months ago in Reno for the new Freak Show album.
That's awesome.
And he's a blast to work with. He's a really nice guy. He's quiet, he's low key, but
I always assumed he was the older brother, but he corrected me when I mentioned Tony Cavazo,
his brother,
your younger brother. He said, whoa, hold up. He says, I'm the younger brother. Tony's older than I am.
Yeah.
So the little brother stole the show in that family, Yeah. But Tony's got Hurricane out with Rudy's brother, Robert Sarzo.
Robert, yeah.
And they're doing their thing. But it's a difficult scene out there to break. And of course, like I say, this new Riley's LA Guns Dark Horse should be out any day now. And I'm not sure if Golden Robot's going to push the release up. I think it's like November 10th, which is only 2 weeks from today. Yeah. So they're probably not going to push it up a week. That doesn't make sense, but it will be out here very shortly. But Stephen and his son ran a lot of the business for LA Guns over the years. And
I didn't know he had any kids.
Yeah, he managed the group, and he helped manage Riley's LA Guns. He's a sharp kid. So Steve lived in Toluca Lake, right down the street here off of Cahuenga Boulevard. Upon his passing, but he always, whenever I interviewed him, he talked very highly of working with Andy Johns. They did like
Yeah.
2 or 3 albums with LA Guns and Andy Johns. For those that don't know, Andy Johns and his brother Glenn Johns, I mean, they worked with a who's who, like Zeppelin,
Yeah.
and,
Out of the
Bad
60s.
Company, and
Rolling Stones.
yeah, Stones and Elton John, and I mean, it just went on and on. Who
Yeah.
those guys worked with, and Andy was a pretty cantankerous drinker, and he produced the Van Halen album For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, simply referred to as the FUCK album.
Right.
But he was known to, if you didn't catch him early in the day, he might barely be able to sit on the stool, at the board. He was really, the pub was always open,
Yeah, the old school English guys.
Yeah. So, but Stephen would speak so highly, and he said, "Look, when I made these 2 Riley's LA Guns albums, the first one is made of just simply LA Guns, the Renegades album, 2020." He said, "I hired Andy John's engineer. We went to Mates to rehearse and work out the songs right up the street here, Coanga and Vineland. And then he said we would go to the same studio where we did the last record with Andy Johns out in Van Nuys. And so he said everything we did was to try and recreate the Andy Johns drum sound that he got for me, and just the amazing miking techniques and mixing that Andy was known for. If you look at the discography of Andy Johns, it is very, very long.
It speaks for itself. Yeah.
But it's sad to see anyone from our era pass. And like I say, with the connection to the Steeler and KEEL family tree, and of course, not only Ron Keel, but your friend Mark Ferrari and Brian J and those guys. And then, of course, with W.A.S.P coming in after the drummer you had played with, Tony Richards. To take his place.
Yeah.
And Steve was a bolt of lightning when he joined W.A.S.P, because frankly, Blackie really felt that Tony Richards' extracurricular activity, aka Peruvian marching powder, had taken over and was not stable. And Riley, like the best of them, was sober. Yeah, he might have had a drink here and there, but he was hard hitting. And that lineup with Chris Holmes and Randy Piper and Steven was.
I don't remember. I'm trying to remember now. You're going to have your detractors out there who are going to say, that they didn't like him or playing with him or something. I imagine that somebody's going to contact Chris Holmes and go, so what was your experience playing with Steve? And I don't remember if he said it was a good one or not good one, but I mean, anybody and anyone and everyone who's not connected to Steve Riley is now, I guess, going to be sought and to be asked for their opinion about it. I'm glad you're the first one to reach out to me and ask me about that. But
well, I know Ron Keel was sad when Steve left, because obviously he felt that they had a tight lineup, And after losing Mark Edwards due to his motocross crash, and whoever he had used in the interim, he had to go back to the drawing board to go out, on tour. I believe Dwayne Miller was the drummer. But Steve was highly sought after, and he told me in interviews, he said, I had to sit there and ponder for a couple hours. Should I leave Keel? We got Gene Simmons producing. We got this deal through A&M Records, or should I go with W.A.S.P and Rod Smallwood, the manager of Iron Maiden?
Yeah.
A lot of people were looking at W.A.S.P like the new Kiss, that first album cover.
That proverbial fork in the road. Which, should I stay or should I go? I had a couple of those myself, so I know.
Yeah. And, we think he made the right move, and, it just added to his pedigree. And then, of course, Blackie wanted to make another change and break up the band again for the 10th time by that point. And that's when he brought in Frankie Banali, which, it was hard to imagine Frankie as being a permanent member of WASP because he was so aligned with Quiet Riot, but with their issues with Kevin DeBro, he was kind of a free agent, at the time.
Well, I think Frankie was a little bit of a free agent too. It wasn't just anchored to Quiet Riot, but he's played with a lot of different people as well.
Yeah.
And everybody adds to their resume like we all do, like that. So, and there are some drummers
he had a similar background to Stephen Riley because they both came from the East Coast, and Frankie had played with a number of known bands before the Mental Health Quiet Riot era.
Frankie was more, as a bass player, rhythm section, Frankie was more of a Bonham type, heavy on the kick drum like Bonham. And Riley's style was a little bit different. Each guy brings his own, they all have their own little idiosyncrasies and quirks and unique things that they bring to the table as a drummer. So, as a bass player, I pick those things out because I have to listen to what the drummer is saying by how he's talking. I was playing.
Well, hang on. Shit. Coming from Queens, New York, moving out here in 75, he played with Steppenwolf, with Nick St. Nicholas and Goldie McJohn.
Bingo.
So yeah. I think Stephen Riley probably took his place in that version of Steppenwolf, probably.
Could be.
Wow.
I don't remember when that
talking about
happened.
A parallel. Yeah.
Yeah. You see how all these dots are connected?
That's crazy. Of course, he played on Billy Idol's Moni Moni, LA Woman recordings, played alongside Dana Strum. And of course, I know you have Dana Strum stories in secret rehearsals for Quiet Riot when Randy Rhoads had joined Ozzy. And I'm interviewing Chuck Wright here in another hour. Of course, he became the bass player of that Quiet Riot and played on Metal Health, Bang Your Head. And then Rudy came in after he left Ozzy. So they're all connected.
And I worked with Quiet Riot while I was still with Sin, and we were recording our album master demo at Camden in Burbank, Studios. And I got a call. I don't know how Kevin found my number, but I got a call in the middle of the night from a very drunk Kevin DeBro telling me, we just kicked Rudy out of the band. We got a South America tour. Your name came up highly recommended, so we need you. You're going to meet with Frankie. He's going to give you the songs, and then you got to practice, over at Carlos's house, which is what happened. And I was sworn to secrecy, and I told nobody. No, I said nothing. My lips were sealed. Somehow, I don't know how, word got out. Dana Strum found out and is telling me, don't do it. They'll stab you in the back. They'll use you and kick you out, blah, 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 like that. Come on, Foxmeyer, stick with Sin, blah, blah, blah. And then I met with Frankie. He gave me a cassette of the song, the live set, the order. And I was woodshedding when I was living in Venice, learning the songs. And I would go up to Hollywood and meet with Carlos. And I would go over to Carlos's house, which was off of Laurel Canyon. We used to have the cul-de-sac house.
Yeah.
And I was rehearsing with Carlos over his house. So again, all these dots connecting and interconnecting and interwoven. And then here we are. And to connect with WASP, I know Stet Halen, who's the drummer now in Freak Show. Stet was a drummer in WASP as well, I guess after Frankie Benelli. And I knew Stet when he first came to LA, and he came into the company I was working at called Starving Students, which was a moving company around Hollywood, LA. Yeah. And Stet and I came, and we were working as moving guys on a truck together. So, but my relationship with Stet goes back to the mid to late 80s when he first got to town. And then here we are years later, and in the same band, two guys from WASP, me and Stet, got Carlos from Quiet Riot, and Ronnie Bouchard from Miss Crazy, now in Freak Show. It's just weird how these things kind of flip-flop and interconnect, and we're all tied to each other somehow, Yeah,
so, I'd say 3 degrees of separation, but it's less than that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, actually, yeah. But 3 is pretty safe. It's usually 6, but 3 is safe, yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, we thank Rick Fox, our special guest, for joining us at this somber time. Breaking news, Stephen Riley passed away at age of 67, drummer for not only KEEL, which came out of Steeler, which Rick played on, of course, their iconic debut album with Yngwie Malmsteen and Ron Keel and Mark Edwards. And of course, he joined WASP after Rick had left the band, and Rick had come up with the name and helped form the original foundation before leaving the band. So a lot of parallels here. Stephen Riley, go listen to some of his records, crank up The Right to Rock and Last Command, Blind in Texas, all that stuff. Hell of a drummer, great guy. And we miss him, but again, we've done multitude of interviews with him that you'll be hearing on future Rock Forever shows. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate your thoughts, and best to you and Freak Show and everything you're working on. We look forward to getting back to you soon, man. Thanks again.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jay. I was just trying to look up to see what bands that Riley played with. And I don't see the one that I was trying to remember. I'll figure it out after we finish talking. I'll find out who it is, but that I couldn't remember. But yeah, but thank you for having me on. And we're sorry to see, Steve's with the rest of our other heroes who have already passed, on the other side and keeping the beat going over there.
Yeah, they're making a hell of a racket up in heaven. You already know the jam.
I can hear it every time we have a thunderstorm here in Missouri. Oh. I'm telling you. It's like an earthquake coming from the sky. So they're doing a hell of a job.
Edward on guitar, Lemmy on bass.
Lemmy.
Riley on drums. The screamers we got up there. I mean, it's thunderous. Thanks again, Rick.
All right, thank you, Jay.